So if that's one way to increase for us to be better stewards, what are some ways that kill stewardship? What are some stewardship just principles that we're actually hurting ourselves all the time?
Yeah, the one I was taught, number one, is waste. I mean, when's the last time, we've gone through and just said, where is there some waste? We had this meeting about 2 or 3 years ago. And let me just preface it by saying we didn't need the money at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, we had enough. We weren't looking for more money. In fact, we had margins. And we had a meeting with our executive team and just said, is there any place where we could save some money? And I'll never forget our CFO guy, Ronnie Bennett, just on a whim decided to call some of our vendors, even some of our utilities, and said, hey, are you giving us the best rate there is? And one of our utility companies said, actually, now that you ask, there's a program that we do for corporations your size. Bottom line, Matt, it ended up being hundreds of thousands of dollars a year saved by that one phone call.
This is a utility company that has no competition. It's just because we asked the question.
Just because we asked. So they had no motivation to do it. And I think it's just a great beginning point is just to look for areas of waste.
And what about ingratitude? We talk about that a lot as a staff team here, about being really grateful for what we do have, not just thinking about what we don't have all the time.
Yeah, and I learned that whenever we were portable, that principle. We were portable, having church at Mountain Brook High School, and I found myself dreaming about one day we were going to be a church with a building. And I was actually complaining because my green room, if you want to call it that, was the bathroom of the men's locker room at this high school. And there was dirty socks and it stunk. And I was in a complaining mood that day. And I remember the Lord speaking to me saying, I'm never going to bless you with more until you're grateful for what you have now. That, there were people who would have traded places with me who had no church or, and we were certainly blessed more than most. And I decided I would never do that again, and just be grateful for what I have before I ever ask for more.
That's so good. Now, when I think about tithing, which is the mechanism for how we get resources inside the church, I've been to services where there's an entire separate message that's about tithing. We put it into messages. We make great videos to try to draw tithing out of people. Is that the right way to go about getting people to engage inside the church?
I don't think so. So that's my second principle, is that don't just preach tithing, model it.
Great.
I think a lot of times, I don't know a pastor who doesn't want everybody in their church to follow the tithing principle, but I think what motivates people to tithe is for you to tell them the story of how not only you're personally tithing as a pastor, but also the church is tithing. So since the very beginning of Church of the Highlands, we've taken in fact, the very first check ever written from Church of the Highlands went to missions. That was even before we knew there was going to be a church that would succeed, right? And then until this day, whenever we process the offerings that people so generously give, the first 10%, even if it overfunds our missions account, the first 10% goes to missions, so that we're giving at least that amount away. And I'm very passionate about this, again, because I was raised in this missions giving church. In fact, I was thinking about this when I was preparing for today's podcast, Matt. I want to do a whole podcast on missions giving.
That's great.
I want to talk about how important it is to be a missions-minded church. And without getting into the details, I think the first 10% of everything the church gets or receives is given away. We need to model this tithing, and for us, that's in that 10%. 1% is to what we call the gospel in Israel. 3% to local missions. So for us, that's dream centers and prisons. 3% to national missions, meaning local churches, which we invest in ARC churches, which is the Association of Related Churches, which is our church planting organization, and then at least 3% to international missions. So we have a missions portfolio that we're very focused on. And here's the point. That is, the Bible says God supplies seed to the sower.
That's great.
So you got to imagine God's got all this extra. Okay, He's got extra. He has, he has, as the psalmist says, the cattle on 1,000 hills. The gold is mine, the silver is mine. God says. So God's got it. Who's He giving it to? And I think God is giving to those that know how to sow it. They're very strategic. They're very intentional with it. So anyway, longer point than we have time for today, but I think we have to model tithing, not just preach it.
Can I ask you to tell one story? Because there's a story you told when we were new at the church, and you talked about you and Tammy's journey coming from Baton Rouge to here. I think that for the listener, it's probably easy to make an assumption, hey, it's easy for you guys to talk about modeling tithing because of where you are and how Highlands has grown. But the way you guys invested personally into the church, that's a story that we hear in step one of the growth track. Every time we have growth track. Can you share a little bit of that for the listener?
Yeah, I didn't start really telling that story to the church. Was about 15 years old because I didn't want it to sound like, oh, look what we did. But yes, we kind of went all in with this thing. We sold everything that we could sell and to invest into the planting of the local church. Best decision ever made, obviously. But again, those principles were already in me that my pastor and my dad put into me, that before you ever ask for anything, you're going to model it first.